Good afternoon. On behalf of the Center for Community Progress, I'd like to welcome you to the April edition of our Cornerstone webinars. My name is Christina Carter, and I serve as the Communications Officer here at Community Progress. Cornerstone is our monthly webinar series that equips participants with the building blocks to understand and solve tough challenges related to property vacancy, abandonment, and deterioration. For today's Cornerstone, we are joined by Alison, Grodzinski, and Michelle Kondo. Alison serves as the Managing Director of the Michigan Youth Violence Prevention Center and Prevention Research Center of Michigan. In her role, she manages a variety of research and evaluation projects which aim to reduce violence and promote safe and healthy communities. Michelle Kondo, PhD, is a scientist with the United States Forest Service. Michelle's research examines environmental strategies, including place-based, nature-based, and clinical interventions for disease, violence, and injury prevention with a focus on low-resource urban communities. Before turning it over to our presenters, I do want to mention that we will allow time at the end of the presentations to answer questions. If you have a question during the presentation, please type it into the Q&A box on the right-hand side of your browser and send it to both the webinar host and all panelists. Finally, if you experience any technical difficulties, please use the chat box to message the Community Progress host or send an email to Christina Carter at ccarter@communityprogress.net. And with that, I turn it over to you, Alison and Michelle.
Thank you, Christina. Good afternoon, everyone. We are excited to be here today to talk to you about the Michigan Youth Violence Prevention Center and our work studying the effects of vacant property improvements on violence. The Michigan Youth Violence Prevention Center is based at the University of Michigan School of Public Health. We are one of 5 youth violence prevention centers funded by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. This network of centers are funded to implement and evaluate community-level strategies to reduce violence. Since 2010, we have been working with community partners in Flint to reduce violence and create a supportive and healthy environment for youth ages 10 to 24. In 2015, we received funding to expand our work beyond Flint to help us explore other approaches and strategies and apply what we have learned to other cities around the nation. Our core research focuses on studying the effects of improving vacant properties on violence, property crimes, and intentional injuries in 3 U.S. cities: Flint, Michigan, Youngstown, Ohio, and Camden, New Jersey. Our partners in the current center are Columbia University, University of Pennsylvania, and Rutgers University. We work with Michelle Kondo at the U.S. Forest Service, and we are working closely with the Center for Community Progress on each stage of our study. Our community partners are very important to us, and we could not do this without them. We work closely with the Genesee County Land Bank in Flint, the Youngstown Neighborhood Development Corporation in Youngstown, Ohio, and Cooper's Ferry Partnership in Camden, New Jersey. There are 2 main phases to our core project. The first phase, we are working closely with Flint and Youngstown to evaluate the relationship between changes in physical environment and youth violence, and to test the professional versus youth-engaged greening approaches. In our second phase of the study, we are documenting community readiness and capacity needs and identifying lessons learned along with Camden to create a best practices guide that will be shared widely along with Center for Community Progress. Our work builds on previous research that indicates caring for vacant properties can have beneficial effects on health and safety of residents. Much of this work has been done by our colleagues in Philadelphia, so I am going to turn it over to Dr. Michelle Kondo to talk about some of their studies and key findings in this area.
Thank you, Alison. I am going to move the slides forward. Here we go. So talking about vacancy, I think many of you on the phone probably have a lot of experience with this, but I will share with you what we see in Philadelphia, which is where I'm stationed. By some counts, there are around 40,000 vacant lots in Philadelphia and throughout, and this map shows that they tend to be concentrated in north, south, and west areas of the city. And let's see, so Philadelphia has probably smaller parcel size, so these lots can be small, and about, I believe, 10% of the lots have vacant buildings on them. And so this is a pervasive issue that residents throughout the city are facing in their daily lives. In Philly, we have something called short dumping that happens here, where contractors are dumping their construction debris, and this happens throughout the city, and it's very common to see piles, shown in this photo of, contractor, construction debris. And vacant lots, they collect trash, they invite illegal or illicit activity. And so we've spoken with residents that live near these vacant lots, and they complain that they are, a source of chronic stress for them, that it really affects their daily lives in a negative way, and increases their, increases depression, stress and depression for them. So I want to tell you about some of the more, what I call, this is an observational study where we look back in time, and this type of study has been done in Philadelphia. I want to tell you about one that we conducted in Youngstown. So we had a group there approach us and asked us to evaluate their program, which is called Lots of Green, between 2011 and 2014. And they had, they had cleaned and greened. That's the term we use for this photo on the left. Although it can come in many different forms, but what I'm using the term clean and green as to imply cleaning up a vacant lot and installing some sort of intervention. So it might include some grass and a couple of trees and perhaps a picket fence, something that can be maintained very cheaply in the long term. And so the city had cleaned and greened approximately 300 vacant lots, and I have an image of where these were located. They were concentrated in two different neighborhoods on both the north and the south sides. And so some of the vacant lots were what we call Contractor clean and green, and that is the photo on the left. That's more of a traditional treatment. And then the rest of them were, we call them community reuse lots. And so these were lots that where a resident or a community group applied for funding and support from the city to do what they wanted with a vacant lot. And most of them were turned into community gardens or orchards. And the city suspected that they were having a positive impact on crime rate throughout the city. And they asked us to evaluate to see if it was actually happening. So we used methods. We compared crime rates around these lots to changes. So we looked at before and after, and we compared that to crime rates also around what we call controlled vacant lots throughout the city, and those are shown in gray. because we wanted to know, well, is the change, if we do see any change in crime rates, is it due to the intervention and not just due to changes in crime rates that are occurring just throughout the city due to perhaps other reasons. And what we found is, we found significant reductions in all types of crimes sort of across the board at both types of lots, but I'm going to go actually back to the photos. We found more significant reductions in property crimes around the traditional sort of contractor cleaning green lots pictured on the left, and we found more significant reductions in violent crimes around the community reuse, the gardens and orchards pictured on the right. We also did not find any signs of displacement, that crimes were just being pushed away. So that was interesting finding there. And that project, as well as others, really helped lead up to this, I believe, first randomized controlled trial of vacant lot cleaning and greening on a citywide level. So we just published results from this study, and this is pretty exciting. We took 600 vacant lots throughout Philadelphia, so we're back in my home city, and we divided them up. Some of them we randomly assigned to be control lots where nothing happened throughout the study period. And the rest, we call them treatment lots, and they received this sort of standard clean and green treatment. Actually, some of them received this traditional clean and green treatment, and others received sort of a partial treatment where contractors came in and they mowed down all the weeds and cleaned up trash. And so we looked at changes in crime rates around these vacant lots, both at the treatment lots as well as at the intervention lots. And we found that after the intervention, we found significant reductions in crime overall, up to 13%, and then as well as a 29% reduction in gun violence, as well as significant reductions in burglary and nuisance crimes. And this was in neighborhoods particularly below the poverty line. And we also conducted surveys with residents that lived near these lots, both before and after the study period. And we found that for residents that lived near the lots that were treated, that were cleaned and green, that they reported significantly reduced perceptions of crime, also vandalism, and so reduced safety concerns. And they also reported significantly increased use of outside spaces for relaxing and socializing. So this speaks to some of this question of, well, how did it happen? Like we see these changes in crime rates, but what's actually going on? What is the mechanism there? To answer some of that question as well, we had some ethnographers involved in the study, and they sort of camped out in two different neighborhoods, and these two neighborhoods looked just alike on paper in terms of sociodemographic indicators. However, one we knew was sort of in a, transition zone, and they felt vulnerable to gentrification, whereas the other did not. And ethnographers noticed that the vacant lots, before they were treated, played a role in the drug trade, actually, in the city. That vacant lots posed as storefronts, or served as storefronts. And, we wondered, well, since we're seeing this effect in gun violence, we wondered if, that people were storing weapons in the lots themselves. And what the ethnographers noted was that actually weapons were being stored in cars parked in front of vacant lots. And so the intervention, it was it sort of disrupted that process. that system, I guess. And one thing we also noted was sort of hostility to the cleaning and greening in the neighborhood facing gentrification or that felt under threat. And whereas, it was welcomed in the other neighborhood. So some interesting sort of dimensions of this. So also taking a look at the survey, we asked questions about mental health. And again, doing in a separate analysis, we found that residents that live near the treated lots, cleaned and green lots, compared to those that live near the control lots, we found a significant decrease in depression and feeling of worthlessness, which is also could be, another mechanism there of this association between the neighborhood environment and crime, safety and crime. So just to talk a little bit about the system that we used here, the cleaning and greening in Philadelphia is done by Pennsylvania Horticultural Society. The typical cost for each lot is $1,600 treatment. So this is under their land care program, as well as $180 per year in maintenance. And the program is funded by, I think they receive about $3 million per year from the general fund to maintain, clean and green and maintain around 12,000 vacant lots per year. And based on our findings of this significant impact, I guess, and benefit on things like gun violence, gun assaults, and homicides, and other more serious crimes, we calculated return on investment for this program based on those costs of $26 in net benefits to taxpayers and over $300 to society at large, dollar invested in the program. So I do want to I can tell you a little bit more about, our research on the mechanisms. How is it that we're seeing these decreases in crime levels? What's really going on here? I'm very interested in stress, people's sort of stress response to their neighborhood environments. And this is a study that we did where we asked residents in 2 different neighborhoods to wear heart rate monitors as well as GPS units while they took a walk around their blocks. And we asked them to take a walk twice. In one of the neighborhoods, it was before and after 3 lots around the block were cleaned and greened. So this sort of, again, standard traditional treatment. And at the control site, nothing happened. So residents just took a walk twice and everything was the same. And we compared their heart rates while they were in view of vacant lots versus when they were in view of the cleaned and green lots. And we did actually see a significant decrease in those average heart rates when participants were in view of the cleaned and green lots. So that may speak, again, to another mechanism. So I'm going to hand it over to Alison now to speak about YVPC and the study that we have going on in 3 cities, or smaller cities.
Thank you, Michelle. So back to the Michigan YVPC, our study really builds on all of this research and some other research we've been doing in Flint, focusing on the idea of engaging community in neighborhood revitalization and whether that makes a difference in an even greater effect in these findings. Our study is founded on 2 key theories. The first is the greening hypothesis, which states that, it's basically what we've been talking about, that improving vacant lots, we can reduce crime, and that those effects can spread and radiate throughout the neighborhood. We have built on that theory to add a level of community engagement, and we refer to this as busy streets theory. Busy streets suggest that these are safe streets where kids can ride their bikes, walk to the park, families walk their dogs, gather for neighborhood events. Busy streets are those streets where positive activity occurs and where people feel a sense of community and trust. It's where people want to be. So our goal with these interventions is to see if we can build those busy streets in these neighborhoods. So our main question that we've added into our study is, can engaging youth give a broader effect of reducing violence and crime? We expect that engaging youth will improve a sense of ownership and build trust and build intergenerational connections among neighbors. So to test that hypothesis, we're working with the 3 cities, Flint and Youngstown, in our first phase of the study, and as I said, we'll be in Camden in our second phase. We chose these cities because they are similar. They're different in a lot of ways, but they're similar in a lot of ways. During the 1950s and 60s, all 3 cities and surrounding counties were prosperous metropolitan areas due to high-paying industrial and manufacturing jobs. After the departure of the industries, Flint was automotive, Youngstown was steel, Camden was appliances and shipbuilding. After the departure of these industries, there was a decreased availability of work and subsequent population loss. Since 1990, the populations of all 3 cities have declined, and in each of the 3 cities, the median income is less than $26,500. More than half of the families with children under 18 live in poverty, and more than 18% of the individuals over 25 have not completed high school. The percentage of dwellings that are owner-occupied is far below the national rate in all 3 cities, and nearly 1 in 5 homes is vacant. Violent crime is also a persistent problem. At the same time, there are multiple community resources and individuals working to prevent further violence and create safe and healthy communities. As I mentioned before, in Flint, we work with the Genesee County Land Bank, and they have established programs that engages youth and adults to care for and repurpose vacant lots. In Youngstown, it is the Lots of Green program that Michelle referred to before. In both of these programs, the organizations engage the community to maintain and improve the lots each summer, and they have programs where the community groups apply and can be part of that those efforts each year. So for our study, to test this hypothesis that engaging community and youth would have stronger and broader outcomes, we structured our study with 3 conditions using a quasi-experimental design. The 3 groups of conditions were community and youth engaged parcels, professional mowing, and no mowing, which is our control. So this study is the first phase of our study, and it was conducted in Flint and Youngstown only. We were also interested in looking at how far the effect went, how far it spread. In previous studies, we had looked at violent crime incidents around a youth-led community garden project, and this is in Flint, Michigan, and we found that violent crime counts decreased by over 50% within 100 meters of the site. And then this effect started to disappear after 200 meters. So for our current study, we took a look at, we worked with our community partners to identify community-engaged study parcels. And then we identified the professional mow and no treatment as well. Around each study site, we created a 200-meter buffer. These are our study sites for each condition in Flint, and this was just for the 2016 and 2017 years. We actually have another year in here where we've added additional sites for 2018. So each of these circles represents a study site with that 200-meter buffer. This is a similar map for what it looked like in Youngstown. And again, we added more sites in 2018. So within that 200-meter buffer zone, we collected data from several sources. The first set of outcomes that we expected to change were how residents perceived their neighborhoods and interacted with each other. So we collected surveys before the property improvement intervention started in spring and early summer. And then we collected a follow-up survey immediately after the summer and another follow-up survey 1 year later. This survey looked at these constructs: neighborhood participation, relationships with police, fear of crime, and relationships with other neighbors. We also deployed trained observers to assess every parcel within the 200 meters of the vacant study parcels each year during the summer. And we were looking at what type of maintenance was on each parcel. We rated for example, we rated how much litter there was on each parcel, whether there was a structure, whether the structure was boarded up, whether people mowed their grass, how high the grass was, so all sorts of different indicators of disorder maintenance. We collected this observation data once a year during the summer and fall months when the grass was still growing. The two final outcomes are violent crime and violent injuries. So in order to assess crime, we collect crime incident data from the police departments here for Flint. It was from the state of Michigan and in Youngstown as well. We are able to compute crime counts for the months before and after the vacant property maintenance begins, and we are going to be able to look for changes in crime rate trends. We used a similar method for identifying changes with violent injury visits at the emergency departments in hospitals in Flint and Youngstown. So over the past 3 years, we have conducted over 3,000 surveys, neighborhood life surveys. We have over 3,000 survey participants. We have assessed over 37 parcels, and we have extracted over 8 years of crime and injury data. And we are just starting to explore some of the findings and look at our research questions. So this is just presenting one of our preliminary findings, is that we looked at crime in both community engaged sites and with respect to the site conditions, the parcel conditions. And this is in Flint. And we did find that in both the community engaged sites and the professional mow sites, we are seeing a significant decrease in crime over time. And this is in comparison to the green line, which is our no treatment, which is just a slight, is relatively stable and a slight increase. So we are now moving into our second phase of the study, working more closely with Camden and doing more capacity building and identifying best practices. We have conducted qualitative interviews with partners to identify resources and greening support that they needed, and we are trying to understand what resources are required for effective community and youth engaged greening and how these needs can be met through these partnerships. These interviews are going to inform a best practices guide and that we are working on this year. In addition, we have just launched a national survey in partnership with the Center for Community Progress to document the scope and variety of vacant property care across the U.S. We want to identify emerging trends, inform new resources, and try to meet the needs of the organizations involved in caring for vacant property. You may have received an email asking you to participate in this survey, and we really do encourage you to take a look at that. If you are involved in greening work or even just beginning to get started, we are trying to reach a wide range of organizations and to look at best practices and any challenges in this work. if you're interested in taking the survey, we do have a link from the Michigan YVPC website that you can use to sign up for the survey. And that brings us to the end of our formal presentation. We are taking questions. We can look through the questions here, and then if you type your questions into the Q&A box, then we can we'll go through them and answer them. So one of the questions here is when and how will the survey results be shared? That's a great question. So we are conducting the survey as we speak. It is live right now. We hope to have the survey completed, the survey respondents completed in the next month, and then over the summer we'll be compiling those survey results. We will be sharing them in the fall, you know, over the next few months after next year as we compile them. And these survey responses will be also used to inform that best practices guide that we are developing.
One of the questions also I see here is how can organizations replicate their study? And I would say, you know, the first step would be to contact us, and we can talk about, you know, whether and if that would be a possibility and how to move forward. Another question, can we have access to the greening studies? And I assume you mean the publications that describe our methods and results. And yes, of course, all the studies that I described are available for download on my website, my Forest Service website. So you just Google me, and I think it's the first link that comes up, and then go to my publications tab. They should all be listed there.
I also see there's a question about connecting with us to work on greening projects. I would suggest, if you are interested in connecting with us, just to contact us through our website. That would be the easiest. Send us an email, and then we can see if there's any support or partnership opportunities there.
There are a couple of questions about displacement of crime. And I should say that in the Youngstown study that I described, as well as in the Philadelphia, the randomized controlled trial, we tested and looked for displacement of crime, sort of just by, you know, for example, you can just use a simple donut versus the donut hole approach to see if we are seeing sort of varying changes in crime rates, both close to and then more distant from each of these vacant lots. And so so far, we have not seen any evidence of displacement of crime as a result of the greening efforts, but we continue to test for and develop new methods for this. I see another question. What other controlled variables or measurements do you have in the pre-post comparison, as well as that of treatment and control lot? So the ideal really is in the randomized controlled trial that we randomly selected vacant lots both in the control group and the treatment group, so that they were balanced or equivalent, I guess, in terms of a lot of different things, sociodemographic where, indicators is the main one. And we really tried to ensure that these lots were sort of equivalent in many different ways. And we tested for this, after we randomized. So there we did not need to control for other things happening perhaps in the background. But in our observational studies, like in the one that I mentioned in Youngstown, we certainly do control for things like, demographic indicators. And we do this, over time. We want to make sure that we're not just seeing effects of sort of demographic change or a shift that's happening in a neighborhood. What else do we control for? Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, no, go ahead, Michelle. I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Well, I think those are the main ones. We also control for sort of geographic location and sort of type of neighborhood. So we often we try to compare sort of likes with likes. We tend to match up our treatment and control lots in sort of similar, maybe quadrants of a city, and that's another strategy that we use.
I see a couple of questions about the process of acquiring the land use permission for the vacant lots that we've worked on. And in both Flint and Youngstown, we had permission because in Flint, these were owned by the land bank or hardest hit, and those were the lots that they were responsible for maintaining, and the same with Youngstown. And worked with partners, worked with the land bank there as well. So we did have permission in that sense to go on to work on those lots.
And I will say in Philadelphia, I believe that the land care program, they were not tax delinquent, so at least half of the lots were not owned by the city. It could be even 75%, but they were in violation of the property code or building code, and that was the way that the city was able to give them notice. They needed to come into compliance within a certain time, or the PHS, the land care program, would come and clean up their lot for them and place a lien on the property. So that's how that works.
When we are pausing, we're just looking through the questions. We're just trying to, there's a lot of questions coming in, so we want to make sure we try to get to as many as possible. There's a question about what references can we share for literature supporting the case for health and safety impacts of community gardens. So I don't know of any sort of large scale, this is sort of an epidemiological approach where you have a lot of study sites. We're talking in the hundreds, and community gardens don't necessarily lend themselves to this type of study, and so any studies of community gardens and related impacts on health are going to be smaller scale. You might see studies of, for example, patients and assigning them to what we call social prescribing. So some patients are asked to or recommended to do some gardening over a certain period of time, and others are asked to sit indoors and read. And their health biometrics are monitored throughout the study period, before and after. And so you'll see that type of study around community gardens, and as well as others. There's a lot of questions, a couple of questions about partnerships, whether city government should be involved. And these are all really great questions, I think, that we are actually trying to answer through some of the best practices work, trying to review what all of the greening organizations that are out there are doing and what is working, what kinds of partnerships are most effective. And hopefully this will lead to some policy recommendations and things that we can share widely with all of the organizations that are doing this to help support the work that you're doing and make it more effective in each city.
I also see a couple of questions about what role did the community and residents nearby play in these vacant lot remediations or treatments. So there's a question: what criteria did you use in prioritizing lots, and was the community involved? Also, did residents design the projects implemented in these vacant spaces? And so that's but I think we can both speak to that. Alison, why don't you go ahead first?
So yes, in Flint and in Youngstown, the programs are already in place. The Clean and Green program with the Genesee County Land Bank, this has been established since 2004, I think. And so they have an application process that the community groups go through that they will apply to take care of lots in their neighborhoods. And so that is all, they are selecting lots that they want to take care of, and it is community driven in that way. For the study, that's what guided what lots would be community engaged. Similarly, in Youngstown, their program that they worked on is a similar type of grant-based program that the community groups apply to for funding to support a community improvement project, a neighborhood improvement project, and those could be community gardens or other types of things in their neighborhoods. And again, that was community-driven. Our study, we made sure, we did everything we could to make sure that whatever the community organization and the neighborhoods wanted was sort of priority, and then we kind of designed the study around those sites themselves, so we weren't disruptive to what was naturally happening within each city.
Right. And I would say that in Philadelphia, I think it's there are a lot of different factors that go into choosing the vacant lots that are clean and green, but likely a local neighbor could be an influence. But let's see. I know that in Youngstown, so talking about the two different types of lots, the community reuse lots, those certainly were resident-driven in terms of both, whether and if the vacant lot was cleaned up, and then also in terms of what residents decided to do with the lot. I mean, there were some boundaries around what was done, and most of them were turned into community gardens. And there we saw different effects. We saw more significant declines in violent crimes as opposed to property crimes. So that is a really strong question, I think, driving some of our future research is what role does that sort of community involvement, engagement, ownership piece play in the change in sort of social dynamics around these vacant spaces.
there's a question here about beyond community greening, are there other categories of busy street interventions that you think are promising for future research or experimentation? And one of the things with the busy streets theory is that it really looks at how communities are engaged with the space. And so we've been doing a lot of studies or a lot of work in Flint looking at how space is being used. So a lot of it is social events, other placemaking activities. And so yes, it does go beyond greening, and we are looking at that through a lot of the different crime prevention through environmental design strategies, and looking at how to engage socially in those spaces.
There's a question about, could these methods be replicated for other vacant property interventions, say like code enforcement on occupied rental units? And the answer is yes. We have done studies, sort of looking back in time, of vacant abandoned building remediation. We did a study of the effects of the doors and windows ordinance in Philadelphia, and we have a randomized controlled trial going on right now, in fact, of vacant abandoned building mitigation in the city. And I have been involved in a study of low-income tax credit renovations, looking at changes in crime rates around those properties. Again, that's in Philadelphia. So yes, I think impacts of housing interventions in general, often having to do with vacancy, is a very big, I think, area, opportunity for study. Another question. Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I've had a question that is just asking to go back to the graph, so I'm just going to move the slides back to this particular slide. And I think there's a question here related to this, about what would you say are the causal mechanisms at play here? Why does vacant lot greening reduce crime rates? Mm-hmm. So I think that what we're seeing is some evidence pointing towards some of what we are trying to study, which is, does it affect neighborhood or social cohesion among neighborhoods, social capital? Is it the mental health, decreases in mental health conditions, depression, anxiety, and all of the survey and all of that that's what we are, exactly what we're trying to determine. And I think as we keep going and analyzing some of the data, we'll be able to give a little bit more information about what that relationship, what those factors going into that relationship really are at play. Michelle, do you have any? You have so much information about this. Do you want to add to that at all?
Oh, well, I spoke to some of the mechanisms that we have not exactly tested, but have done some research around. And so like the stress levels, heart rate is an indicator of stress levels. We have done surveys and found that people's depression reduced after the intervention. And that perhaps it could have to do with social cohesion. We found people reported spending more time outside to socialize and relax after the clean and green treatment in Philadelphia. So all speaking to these social connections, interactions, stress, and mental health. Okay, question about funding for the programs. Is it grant-driven or community-driven? And this is, so in, let's see, it depends. Often when cities approach us, the programs that are already occurring, they are funded by communities themselves, or cities, municipal governments, or by community organizations from a a variety of funding sources. But when we do find are able to make a partnership centered around study, research, and evaluation, the goal is to apply for grant funding to do the study, to do the research, and that also often includes some funding to support the intervention itself. So that might go to the program to actually do the cleaning and greening during the study period. And, it might look like business as usual, except that we often ask that we would be able to designate some control lots. So we might ask, to set aside a random selection of vacant lots that we would ask not be treated during the study period, that they could be treated after the study period. So that might be something that would feel different.
One thing I would want to add to that as well is that we are, looking at these strategies as a way to prevent violence because of it is, as Michelle alluded to earlier, it's a cost-effective mechanism or strategy. So what we're hoping to show that. So, the funding, as Michelle said, this is business as usual for the partners that we are working with. We want to provide support that what they're doing is working, and hopefully we'll give them enough data and evidence to allow them to find funding through other ways. And so we're hoping to incorporate that into some of the work and the best practices that we do as well.
I see a question about placemaking. There is a question, was creative placemaking used in any of the studies, and do you think this would impact results? I've been thinking about this a lot, and especially because I'm doing some analyses, additional analyses of the Philadelphia data set, and finding some differences in terms of outcomes between men and women, and I also want to look at the age groups, so youth versus other age groups, and so I mean, yes, I think that placemaking and community engagement and ownership involvement in sort of transforming these neighborhood spaces likely can have different types of impacts on health than the more what you're seeing here, where contractors come in and just do this intervention. But it would affect cost. The clean and green treatment is very affordable, right? It's low cost and scalable across the city. Whereas, doing a placemaking or a visioning process, doing some outreach and engagement, of course, increases costs associated with the development and change process. Not to say that it's not worth doing, and I know that there are a lot of community groups already doing it. But so yes, I think that type of process and within this vacant property remediation list of strategies is really important to consider in future research.
Well, I am looking at the time, and I think that there are a lot of questions, and I think we got to most of them, but I'm sure there are some that we did not get to. But if, you know, my contact information is on the YVPC website, which I have just put on the screen. Please feel free to send me an email or Michelle, and we can try to respond if there are other questions we didn't get to. And I think we're going to turn it back over to Christine.
Yes, thanks so much, Alison, and to you also, Michelle, for your really great presentations. We received a lot of great questions today. And thanks to all of you for joining us this afternoon. We hope that you'll join us on May 23rd for our next Cornerstone webinar. Feel free to check out our website for more information on this and other upcoming webinars. Have a great afternoon, everyone.
Thank you.